Good morning. I'm Ruth Appelhoff, the Executive Director of Guildhall, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you here today. It's a thrill to be here with so many of you who are making art history as we speak. But first, may I thank Billy Rayner for his lovely watercolors in the education lobby, and Nina Yankiewicz for her interactive installation in the Spiga Gallery. This is the last day of these exhibitions, as well as the one we celebrate today, the work from the Fape collection, the Foundation for Art and Preservation in Embassies. We thank the Fape board, and especially Joe Carroll Lauder, for not only making the exhibition available to Guildhall, but for also organizing these amazing panels. To introduce the panel today, we have our museum director and chief curator, Christina Masaitis Strassfield, who has curated over 100 exhibitions for the museum, including works by Chuck Close, Eric Fischel, Russ Bleckner, Cindy Sherman, and historically noted artists Lee Krasner, Hans Namath, and Robert Dash. I also noticed that Joe Zucker is in the room, so congratulations to Joe as well for an exhibition here. Christina also has started a group of art lovers called the Collector's Circle, and we invite you all to join that and participating in choosing some art for our wonderful collection. So now please welcome Christina Strassfield.
Good morning. I'm here to introduce Bob Colacello. Bob Colacello began his writing career in 1969 when he began publishing film reviews in the Village Voice Weekly. In 1970, Bob wrote a review of Andy Warhol's film Trash. This review garnished the attention of Warhol and Paul Morrissey, the director of many of Warhol's films, who approached Bob to write for Interview magazine, a new art film fashion magazine Warhol had recently began to publish. He was made editor of Interview within 6 months, and for the next 12 years, Bob remained directly involved in all aspects of life and business at the factory. Warhol's infamous studio, as he developed the magazine into one of the best-known lifestyle magazines of the time. After his tenure with Interview, he began writing for Vanity Fair magazine and has been a regular contributor since, writing extended profiles on a wide range of public personalities. He's also the author of the highly praised Ronnie and Nancy, Their Path to the White House, 1911-1980, about the social and political rise of Ronald Reagan and his wife, Nancy Reagan. His memoir of working with Andy Warhol in the 1970s and early 1980s, titled Holy Terror, Andy Warhol Close-Up, was called the best written and most killingly observed book on the subject by the New York Times. The book is available in our museum gift shop, and Bob has generously offered to sign copies after the panel in the lobby. Plug, plug, plug. After the panel, the galleries will also be open. Please do take a moment to look at the Fape exhibition and Nina Yankiewicz's Crisscrossing the Divine in the Spiga Gallery, as well as Arlene Slavin's Intersections in the Wasserstein Family Gallery and Furman's Sculpture Garden. Lastly, we hope you'll join us for the opening of the Robert Motherwell, the East Hampton Years on August 9th at 4 p.m., which will be preceded by a panel discussion at 3 p.m. We would like to thank the Board of Fape and Jennifer Duncan, the Executive Director, for bringing us this wonderful exhibition. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you all for coming here today. I think I've got a pretty good panel of distinguished guests, all of whom in one way or another know a lot about Andy Warhol, and I hope they'll share some of it. Peter Brant started collecting Warhols when he was 11 years old and still attending elementary school in Jamaica Estates. No, actually, he started when he was all of 20 and at the University of Colorado. He was also my boss for a couple of years in the early 1970s when he and his partner in the newsprint business, Joseph Allen, bought half of Interview magazine from Andy. They very smartly traded their money-losing investment back 2 years later with several major early pop paintings. After Andy died in 1987, Peter bought the now profitable magazine from Andy's estate, while all along holding on to the ever more valuable paintings he traded it for 15 years earlier. seriously, I mean, for more than 4 decades, Peter has been the most supportive, dedicated, and knowledgeable of Andy's collectors. Peter produced 2 of Andy's feature films, L'Amour in 1973 and Bad in 1977, as well as the acclaimed 2006 PBS documentary on Warhol, directed by Ken Burns. He has also produced feature films on Jackson Pollock and Jean-Michel Basquiat, the latter directed by Julian Schnabel. Last year, Peter personally curated one of the most beautiful Warhol exhibitions I've ever seen, and I've seen a few, at the Brant Foundation Art Study Center near his home, and Polo Club, can't forget the Polo Club, in Greenwich, Connecticut. So thank you, Peter, for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Donna DeSalvo is the Chief Curator and Deputy Director for Programs at the Whitney Museum of American Art. She is probably the only one on this panel who has not made a fortune on Andy Warhol. And me.
Oh, well.
She is, however, one of the world's most perceptive and articulate experts on Warhol, and has curated numerous exhibitions and authored many catalogs on his work for, among others, the Warhol Museum, the Dia Art Foundation, and the Tate Modern in London, where she mounted a major retrospective in 2002. Shortly after Andy's death, Donna pioneered the critical and market interest in Andy's pre-pop 1950s work, which until then had been considered mostly fashion and commercial illustration. With an exhibition titled Success is a Job in New York, the early art and business of Andy Warhol at NYU's Gray Art Gallery. It was a great exhibition and really an eye-opener, I remember. One of her first projects at the Whitney's new building in downtown Manhattan will be what she calls a thematic Warhol retrospective, the first comprehensive show of his work in New York since MoMA's retrospective nearly 20 years ago. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for asking me.
Larry Gagosian of the New York, Los Angeles, London, Paris, Rome, Athens, Geneva, Hong Kong Gagosians has undoubtedly had more Warhol shows in more cities than any other contemporary art dealer in the world. His first one was done a year before Andy died and featured the Oxidation series, which at the factory were known as the Piss Paintings, but we'll get into that later. Larry currently has 14 galleries, with the 3rd London gallery scheduled to open next year. In fact, my next Guildhall panel will be called Larry Gagosian, Global Phenomenon. Always ahead of the curve, he was one of the first art dealers to mount museum-like exhibitions of major historical artists, ranging from Monet to Brancusi, Fontana, and Jackson Pollock. His 2009 Picasso Mosqueteros show, curated by the highly esteemed art historian John Richardson, drew 100,000 visitors to the West 21st Street Gallery, and last year's massive Basquiat show on the at the West 24th Street space attracted more than 85,000 visitors. Thank you, Larry, also for being here. Jane Holzer was known as Baby Jane Holzer in the 60s, when she starred in several Warhol films, including Soap Opera, Screen Test, and Batman Dracula. A real estate heiress married to a real estate heir, Lenny Holzer, she had already been dubbed an It Girl by Diana Vreeland, Vogue's imperious editor-in-chief, along with Jean Shrimpton, Twiggy, Penelope Tree, and Marisa Berenson. She then became Andy's first and only fully sane superstar, launching what he saw as his version of MGM's More Stars Than There Are in Heaven lineup, which soon came to include Viva, Ultraviolet, International Velvet, Bridget Polk, Pompondine, Paul America, Joe D'Alessandro, Sandro and the Transvestites, Candy Darling, Holly Woodlawn, Jackie Curtis, and Rotten Rita. You have to tell us all about Rotten Rita. Since those heady days, she has gone on to become a major film producer with credits including Almodovar's Kiss of the Spider Woman, Paul Morrissey's Spike of Bensonhurst, and Harmony Korine's Spring Breakers, as well as an important collector of contemporary art with significant holdings of Warhol, Christopher Wall, and Rudolf Stingel's works, among others. Earlier this year, the Norton Museum of Art in West Palm Beach mounted a fabulous exhibition called To Jane, Love Andy, Warhol's First Superstar, which was great. And even had Jane's Carège dresses from the early 60s. It was fantastic. And thank you, Jane, for coming all the way from Southampton. Crossing the great Bridgehampton Divide. Alberto Mugrabi, who we all know as Tico, is not only one of the sons of the man who owns 800 Warhols, as the Warhol as the Warhol Street, the Wall Street Journal, it's not yet called the Warhol Street Journal, as the Wall Street Journal dubbed his father, the Colombian-American fabric king, Jose Mugrabi. He is actually the son who pushed his dad to buy the Warhols while Andy was still living, and his prices were, if not quite in the basement, stuck on the mezzanine level, shall we say. The paintings, which include the family, which includes Alberto's brother, David, is now up to 900 Warhol paintings, and they also own countless drawings, photographs, and sculptures. The Mugrabis are also among the largest private collectors of Jean-Michel Basquiat and Damien Hirst, and of the next generation of artists working in the legacy of pop art, such as Dan Colin, Nate Lohman, and Adam McEwen. Tico Alberto is the co-founder of the Lever House art collection, which brings us to his partner in that endeavor and our next panelist, Aby Rosen. Aby owns almost as many trophy buildings as Larry has galleries. In fact, he's Larry's landlord at 980 Madison Avenue. This panel's a little incestuous, I admit that. Then there's the aforementioned Lever House and the Seagram Building, the two most important modernist skyscrapers in Manhattan, as well as the Gramercy Park Hotel, the Paramount Hotel, and the W Hotel in Miami Beach, among many others. Never afraid of controversy, Aby has gone further than any other real estate developer in showcasing the most advanced art of our time in and around his buildings. Who else but Aby, for example, would have the Bruce High Quality Foundation's giant bronze Union Rat standing in front of Lever House at Park Avenue and 53rd Street in the very heart of corporate capitalism? About 24 Warhol commissioned portraits of everyone from the Shah of Iran to Dolly Parton from Aby's personal collection are hanging in the Casa Lever restaurant. It's a great restaurant and the art looks great. And it should be noted, it also should be noted that Aby serves as chairman of the New York State Council of the Arts. So with that, I'd just like to ask you my first question. I hope each of you could tell us how and when you met Andy, or started collecting his work in the case of those who never met him. So Peter, if you would start.
Thank you. I first met Andy. I actually first started collecting his work for probably a year and a half before I met him. The first person to introduce me to his work was Bruno Bischofberger in Zurich, who I knew since I was about 15 years old, skiing with him in Switzerland, and where I spent some time. And Bruno introduced me to Leo Castelli, and Leo kind of became, a mentor to me, and he introduced me to Andy's work, and amongst the other artists that he had in his gallery, and I took a liking to Andy's work especially. So I started collecting it with the help of Bruno and Leo Castelli, and basically Andy had heard that this kid was buying some of his work, some of his major pictures, and he, Leo arranged that I meet Andy, and that's when I came to meet Fred Hughes, who sort of introduced me to Andy, and we became, very good friends and spent a lot of time together. Fred, myself, Sandy, Brant, and Andy, and you. So that's how I first met him.
And Donna?
I first met Andy in the early 1980s when I went to work for the Dia Art Foundation. And Heiner Friedrich, who I think is here, had been working with Andy to put together a rather extraordinary retrospective collection of Warhol's work that was slated actually to go to Pittsburgh at one point. And that was the idea behind it, so I'm glad that's what happened in the end. And it was a funny time because I think that Warhol was not, he was not at the height at that moment. I don't think there was an enormous response. I was a young curator. I was interested in the work. I was even a bit skeptical. So it was an amazing process for me to work with him on the collection, but then also to do 2 exhibitions at Dia's space at Worcester Street at that time. One was just of disaster paintings, and then the other one was a show of Warhol's hand-painted images from 60 to 62. And I got very interested in Warhol pre-silkscreen, and it seemed to dovetail with some of the works he was making at that time, the ads and things of that nature. We did some interviews together, and I feel lucky to have met him. We didn't work together that long a period of time before he died in '87, but he's remained a touchstone for me as a curator, actually, for many, many years. And I find him to be one of the artists. I mean, there are many artists like this, but in particular, he's an artist that you can kind of find your way anywhere. So I think calling your panel Global Phenomena makes total sense.
Larry, you got to know Andy. You opened your first New York gallery in the 80s?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly the first time I met him, but I think I met him when he was working at the Union Square studio.
Mm-hmm. 860
yeah,
Broadway.
I think I somehow got invited to the studio, maybe through Fred Hughes, who was somebody I'd met socially, and I wanted to meet Andy Warhol, so I kind of made it a point of figuring out a way to get over there. And it was not a very auspicious meeting. I mean, I found him very, kind of remote, and but I was thrilled just to have had the opportunity to meet him and see him in the studio, and then I started collecting his work, and Fred paid attention to the fact that I was, becoming a more active dealer in Warhol's market, so he brought me over to have a proper meeting with Andy, and I started actually doing business with him,
what was he like to do business with?
It's a really interesting question, because it's like a different world compared to the way many artists work today. He was like an old-fashioned artist in the sense that he worked kind of by the seat of his pants in terms of his dealings with the market, and he was very straightforward. There were not a lot of lawyers or middlemen. I mean, Fred Hughes sort of ran the show along with Vincent. Fremont, along with Vincent Fremont, who's here, but it was very uncomplicated. I mean, I remember one time it's kind of a nice story to start off with. I was having lunch with Fred and Andy at their desk. We were having like cold cuts and typical Warhol lunch, diet soda and bologna sandwiches or something, and I'm literally, and there was this big painting of a Coca-Cola bottle. An early painting, I think it was 1962 painting, black and white, large painting. And I just casually mentioned to Fred or Andy, we were all sitting there, I said, you want to sell this painting? It was just hanging there. And he said, well, yeah, maybe. And I said, well, how much? And he said, well, and they talked for a minute, and then they came up with a price, and we did a deal. We made a deal. I actually didn't buy it. It was beyond what I could afford at that time, but I had a client who I knew would be interested in it, and I think painting was sold that afternoon. So that's when now you got to go through a lot of channels. There's a lot more hocus pocus, and which I'm not saying is a bad thing necessarily, but it was just a different way of doing business. And he was a great guy to deal with as an art dealer.
Yeah, no, when I was still there, I was editor of Interview, but when you worked for Andy, you ended up selling art because you got a commission and the salaries were so low. And it was, I would talk to the client, and then Andy would, by that, we usually had people down for lunch, and then Andy would wander off to the back of the space to start painting in the afternoon. And then, I would go back and tell Andy, well, they're interested in this, what's the price? And Andy would give me a price, and I'd say, well, how low can I go? And I'd go back, and, and that would be it. I mean, it would just, and then Vincent would send them an invoice and make sure to get paid, which wasn't always easy. But anyway, it was very simple. It was a mom and pop shop almost, with Andy as pop and Fred, I guess, his mom. Jane, you met Andy. I mean, you knew Andy the longest, and from very early on.
I was walking a street corner at 159th in Lexington, and I was with Nikki Haslam and David Bailey, and Nikki saw Andy and said, "Oh, that's Andy." So he the two of us met, and the first thing Andy said is, "You want to be in the movies?" And I said to myself, not out loud, that beats the shit out of being a bored housewife. So the next thing I knew, I was filming a film like 3 days later, and then I went to, you know, the first factory, and there were these beautiful,
the silver factory.
Yeah, the silver factory, and there were these beautiful flowers being, he and Jerry Malenga were silk screening these beautiful flowers on the floor. And I said, well, I want to buy some of these. He said, go see Leo. And I went to see Leo, and the rest is history. I mean, I went to see Leo almost every week, and it was a good thing.
And Tico, did you meet Andy before
No,
he
I
died?
never met Andy, but the first time that we saw Warhol's work was in Art Basel in Switzerland. And this dealer called Hans Meyer had a booth, and in the booth he had like these paintings by Warhol that were the Last Suppers. And it was the first time we saw the work, and what got us interested in it was the color variation that he had. Like one was yellow, one was green, black on black. And it was the image that we recognized immediately, but the way the colors were printed in different colors got us interested in the work, and we ended up buying 10 paintings that day without knowing who Andy Warhol was.
So I was wrong, you didn't start buying until right after he died, shortly after he died, not before. I was wrong in my introduction. I said you and your father started before.
Yeah, no.
It was right after, shortly after Andy
right
died.
after he died in 1987.
Yeah, and the prices were still really low. No?
They were literally, they were $30,000 for a painting, $25,000 for a painting.
Yeah, I mean, people don't realize that Andy's prices before he died were much, much lower than Jasper Johns or Rauschenberg or Lichtenstein. I mean, he was so famous, but he wasn't taken that seriously somehow by the, you know, the critics and the curators. I mean, Donna was one of the first. The Whitney Museum was one of the most supportive of Andy's work. MoMA never showed Andy while he was alive. But anyway, we'll move on to Aby Rosen. You never met Andy, no?
I did.
Oh, you did?
I came here I was in law school in Germany, Frankfurt, and I took off for 6 months, one semester, and I spent 3 months in New York, and that's where I met him in 1985.
At Studio 54?
Very good.
No.
A little bit earlier. I met him, but I don't remember that anymore. But I met him in I met him in '85 with Eric Good and Jean-Michel Basquiat. We went out for dinner. I think it was to Indochine, is where they most usually were hanging. And I was here. I was 25 years old. I was young. I was not in the art purchasing at those days yet. I started buying Andy's work '94, very late, probably the latest of all the gang here. I did pick up some speed on how much I bought and what I bought, but very late I got into the game, and it was very similar to what Larry said. Very removed, very remote. I had very little interest. The only time we spoke about Germany, and then suddenly he woke up and realized a lot of the work that was commissioned to German people, we knew a lot of people in common. So, as you know, you sold a lot of portraits, a lot of art to German industrialists, individual people, and that's where he said, oh my God, you know this guy, you know that guy, and that's somehow his interest, and then it just flattened off again to something else. But it was an interesting time for me when I moved here, '87, then he was gone at that point.
Yeah, it was hard to hold a conversation with Andy. I mean, because people used to say, well, like, what do you really do for Andy? I said, well, I'm his translator, English to English. Because he would get interested in something, then he would just go revert to, oh, wow, oh, gee. I mean, he was very talkative with those of us who worked closely with him. But sort of when he was out and about, he was a man of few words. He liked to actually draw. I think one of Andy's geniuses was he gathered so much information from so many different kinds of people that's what, in a way, contributed to making his art truly popular, because it comes out of the times themselves. I mean, would you agree with that, Peter?
Yeah, I think. Also, he had this. He always felt very protective of him.
Because Peter was very, very close.
He was always. I actually, my experience with him was, I think, all the artists that I've ever met in my life, he actually naturally had the most human for business naturally. I mean, he just generally knew what the right decision was. He had a very good feeling about people, even though he didn't engage that much. When he, was a voyeur and looked at people in certain settings, he really zeroed in on, zero in on them, and he generally made the right move. Generally invested in the right kind of things, and
he was a big collector.
He was a big collector of antiquities, a big collector of
Art
Deco, of early American, painting and early American furniture and Indian artifacts. And he was a
cookie jars.
Cookie jars. He collected. I mean, I think collecting was really a large part of his life. I mean, he used to really go out antiquing practically every day. Or he'd go in and work, and he'd always do that. And he was very much interested in other artists. And he, of course, loved Jasper Johns, loved Rauschenberg. He loved their work.
Twombly.
Loved Twombly. But in reference to the value of his work when he passed, it was probably 1/5 of what Jasper's work was.
I was going to say about the social observer, as you're saying. I mean, one of the revelations for me when I did the show, the early work, which I don't think Andy was really that interested in seeing happen. And actually it was Fred and Vincent who were very supportive of the idea, I think the idea of showing the commercial work for someone like Warhol, who at that time, had waited for his retrospective at MoMA, which is, didn't come until after his death. And so a lot of that early work of the 50s was not well known. The Gotham Book Mart had done a show. Rainer Krone, of course, was very pioneering in his work. But one of the things I found so interesting is I interviewed all these art directors that Warhol had worked for, and many of them were people who were really from top agencies. And his capacity to really understand what the client wanted, to me, was so superb, that he could even suppress his own more creative side in order to get the job. And that's why I called the show Success is a Job in New York, because he really understood, and I think that's why and how Warhol understood why something meant and could mean on multiple levels. He was so perceptive, and I think that level of social observation, and I would even go as far as to say social networking, which is something I'm really interested in, how you think about Warhol now, even less than, he's been gone for 27 years now, and his impact is so massive, and it goes to the art itself and the market, of course. But then there's this larger thing that I think he anticipated. I've started to think now about his portraits as a kind of Facebook. That there's this way in which he really understood the world, almost like an anthropologist would, as much as an artist. I think that's what's so profound and so lasting. And we still are figuring it out, which is, of course, what any curator wants with any artist.
Yeah, I mean, there have been Warhol retrospectives, everywhere from, from Kazakhstan to Uruguay, Singapore, Hong Kong, Beijing. I mean, you could go on and on. And there have been hundreds of gallery shows since his death. The prices we know, he's one of the handful of artists who has sold a work for over $100 million, which was 8 Elvises, which went, I think it went to someone from the Qatari royal family in 2008. But Cezanne, Picasso, Klimt, Munch, Giacometti, Pollock, de Kooning, Johns, Andy's up there in that pantheon. How do you explain this such widespread appeal? Not only in terms of prices among, in the market, but the fact that hundreds of thousands of people turn out for these. Tico was telling me about an exhibition in Japan that your family helped put together, and just the amount of press, the amount of books, the amount of documentaries. Why Warhol?
In my opinion, Warhol translates the American culture like no one else does. And if you look what American culture has given back to the world, is the blue jeans, the t-shirts, the hot dogs, the Coca-Cola, the Hollywood. And everyone in all parts of the world are so obsessed with Hollywood, with celebrities, with going out with a pair of jeans and a pair of sneakers, simple living. And I think that Warhol really brought that to every part of the world. If it's Japan, if it's Russia, if it's anywhere, it's people want that casual, simple living in America is the key of that, in my opinion.
Larry, what do you think is at the root of this widespread popularity as well as these extraordinary prices and this huge influence over younger artists. Wouldn't you? I mean, you look at most younger artists, you can trace some aspect of their work back to Andy.
You know, it's a complicated. It seems simple, but I think it's complicated. You know, I've done a lot of shows of Andy's work. I was lucky enough to do an exhibition while he was alive with him, and I don't know how many exhibitions we've mounted. I was very fortunate to have access to the works that were left in his estate, and we carved out a series of shows from that, you know, from that enormous body of work. And having done these exhibitions, I was struck by something. When you know, the artist's been dead, you know, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, but when you'd have an opening, it felt like there was a living artist there in a funny way. There was something about the coolness of Andy Warhol that was irresistible. And it was like everything just kind of came together. It's an artist that comes along, a transformative artist. Everything kind of came together. The personality, the lifestyle, and the imagery created an incredibly cool image for American culture. And I think what Alberto said is absolutely correct, that he exported what America exported. His fascination with movies and movie stars was similar to our fascination with it. He spoke for everybody in a way, but in a disarmingly sophisticated way. I mean, it was, as far as the prices, you know, prices are prices. I mean, whatever drives prices in any market, it's always it's always comes down to supply and demand, I guess. And there's a lot of, even with the amount of works that Andy created, the demand, you know, the demand seems to grow greater and greater, particularly in other parts of the world. Like you cited all those. I wasn't even aware of some of those exhibitions taking place in South America, for instance. But the following for his work, commercially and curatorially, is truly global. And the guy died when he was 58 years old. He did not have a long life. Unfortunately, he died kind of in a fluke way, you could say. But you got the feeling that the work would have continued. So when you say late Andy Warhol, he was 58 years old when he died. You know, maybe the late work would be now.
It was midlife.
Would be now, maybe this would be the late work.
Aby, you started collecting after Andy's death a category of Andy's work, let's call it the commissioned portraits, which weren't taken that seriously because they were commissioned. The idea was Andy didn't choose to do these paintings, and now we see them as, I guess, an important part of Andy's oeuvre, really.
When I started buying them, I was more interested in portraits, period, historically, just because it was a great portraits are a great snapshot of history, of time. And for me, it was looking at 17th and 18th century portraits, and then me personally not relating to them, and I didn't want to have and live with them. So looking at Andy Warhol's portraits, it was for me a snapshot of what the 20th and the 21st century historic summary was. And for me, I think I have 65 portraits, and for me, the one individual one might not do it. Having them in a group together, suddenly you see the interchange and the play with the colors and with the subject. And at one point, the famous one is equally important than the unfamous one, or the sports one is equally famous or important as the movie star. And having them all together, the play amongst them is one. I see it as one piece of art. And if you had 700, how many portraits were there? I think 760 different.
Somewhere like that.
Somewhere like that. I mean, just imagine them all together and.
Well, that was Andy's vision. I mean, he always insisted the size had to be 40 by 40, and he was very flexible about accommodating the client in terms of color or even painting style. Some clients wanted more painterly things, some wanted more pop, but he would never move on size, and you know, he wouldn't do 36 by 36 or 50 by 50. And one day I said, Andy, why, you know, won't you be a little more flexible? And he said, because someday I want one portrait of every person I painted. I want them all put together in one big painting at the Metropolitan Museum. And I want them all, they have to all fit together as one big work, and I want it to be called Portrait of Society.
So he at that point also thought it was one
that's
big
how
work.
he envisioned them. And Aby at Lever House, Casa Lever restaurant, which to see actually, you know, the Shah next to Nureyev, next to Nan Kempner, next to Muhammad Ali. It's amazing. Jane, you had your portrait done, no?
Yes, I did. But interesting.
What is it about Andy's work that made you, you know, once a week go buy another one?
Because
or very early on.
They made me happy. There's just no brain. It just was an emotion, and it still is. Mm-hmm. I mean, they make me happy.
And Peter, what did you see in Andy's work from the beginning and now? I mean, you did a fantastic show at your museum in Greenwich. I mean, what did you think about it then, and what do you think about it now, having, you know, the perspective of time?
Well, you know, I always he was always the artist of his period. He really was a standout for me. And I never could really understand why he wasn't embraced more at that moment. A lot of it probably had to do with this kind of fictitious sort of jar about him manufacturing these pictures. And, you know, he would be, I mean, some of the artists today would be, you know, would be much more mass-producing.
Oh yeah, I mean, Jeff Koons is a factory, and he really wasn't a factory.
He really touched all the work, and it was really his idea, and he really kind of controlled these mistakes that you saw on his work. He really controlled those mistakes, and that was part of his work. And it's much deeper than just taking our American icons and exporting them. I mean, he really has. You see art history in his work. I think it was the process that made it so radical for people that they weren't willing to, you know, accept. I mean, you know, we came out of abstract expressionism, which was about paint and about, you know, this jazz and doing things and gesture and texture. And Andy was, you know, this work to those artists was just like using photography, and that was not art, you know. And
I remember we did an issue of Interview, I think in 74, 75, called "Is Photography Art?"
Right.
That was still a very open question, and you could buy. But I'm sorry I interrupted, but I think it's true. I mean, just Andy's work was, a lot of people would say to Andy to his face, you know, I remember Andy always wanted to do the portrait of Dali and exchange portraits with Salvador Dali, and his wife Gala, who was quite formidable, said, Dali, no exchange oil painting for photographs. Right. You know, you're a photographer. And Andy was like, oh, I hate her.
And also the way that the pictures were produced in a factory. Like you would go and it was like Ford was doing cars in their factory, Warhol was doing paintings in this factory. Like silk screening and mass producing of a picture the same way that a car company does their cars. Warhol was producing things in that manner. So it was, even the concept of doing something like that was so American.
Go ahead.
It's also because he, you know, flared that by talking about manufacturing it when he really wasn't. I mean, he
mixed all his own colors.
And also, when he worked, it was a very private thing for him. You know, it's not like he would invite me or anybody up to watch him paint. You know, he was very, especially in the late '60s, early '70s, he was very private about his work, and he never liked to talk about his work, and he really. You know, wouldn't sit really on a panel like this unless you answered the questions for him.
Yeah, no, he had me or Bridget Berlin, and the journalists would go crazy because they'd say, we don't want Bob Colacello's answers or Bridget Berlin's, we want yours. But no, when I started there at 33 Union Square West, which he painted on a separate floor in a little closet-like room, and you had to go up there and knock on the door, you know, if you had something important to tell him, like something came up with the magazine or something. And he usually just would open the door a little. He didn't, but I remember him painting the portraits of his mother, and he was sort of finger painting almost. I mean, that was a moment that I'll never forget because they were, it was like the first time you really saw some like emotion in Andy's work. I mean, because it was, you know, he always tried. Andy was so clever in like showing no emotion as a person in the work. I mean, he kind of lined, like Larry said, he kind of lined up. It all was of a piece. The way he dressed, what his art was, the lifestyle he had. I mean, I don't know. Jane wasn't, when you met him, that was just forming. I mean, he was, you know, in the black leather jackets, and he had the Velvet Underground and the disco.
Yeah. Yeah, but
I mean, do you think he was very aware of his image even then?
Yes, yes. And I mean, I used to take him to parties, and he would show up with like 10 people, and everyone looked at me, you know, what's going on here? And in the end, he took me to parties. He had become so, it just was a total opposite.
Didn't you introduce him to the Rolling Stones and Mick Jagger?
Yeah, I did, to the Rothschilds, on and on. But it's interesting because during the portrait show at the Grand Palais, I noticed that the picture, you're talking about 40-40, but then like of Bardot and Gunther Sachs, they were bigger. And I think,
were 42s.
Yeah, and what I mean by that is that
66.
Yeah. So I think that that was a statement that I think he really, they were maybe his kings and queens.
They were very early too, though, the Bardot, before he really.
Yeah, but the point is that they also are so beautiful.
Yeah.
Of making and how he made things, because I think what's really interesting is, you know, not to dwell on the early time, but I do think it's fascinating to look at how Warhol struggled to figure out how to leave abstract expressionism behind, and all those paintings, the different series of Coca-Cola paintings, the before and after paintings. When I did this early show at Dia, Andy said, oh, I have these works in a closet, and we literally laid them down on the floor, and they were unstretched. And one of them was, in fact, one of the before, Vincent, you probably remember this, it was one of the before and after paintings, and it was really fantastic. It had Ben Day dots on it. And I was, you know, like, wow. And Andy said, oh, I don't know. And he said, maybe I should paint those out. I was trying to be like Roy. And I said, oh, no, don't touch it. But, you know, it was sort of fascinating to look at the struggle that he was engaged in. And I have an interview with him where we talked about, I asked him what studio, I was like young, and I asked him stupid questions like, how does it feel to be a postmodernist icon? And he sort of stared at me. And then the next time I interviewed him, I just stared back, and I realized, oh, that's it, don't speak. And then he'll eventually, but, you know, I said, what studios did you go to? And he said, oh, I went to Ad Reinhardt's studio. And I said, really? I was fascinated by that. And he said, yeah, I looked at those paintings. He said, he was really just painting the same painting over and over, but they were all complicated underneath. So his also capacity to understand what was going on, the effect of a Barnett Newman. And you think of, for instance, some of those great disaster pictures where you have the blank canvas and then the screen canvas. It has the same physical effect as a Newman, but not the spirituality or the transcendence. And that, to me, is the critical edge about the American, good or bad. I mean, you know, you can take Warhol's work on many, many different levels. And I think, Aby, when you were talking about, I mean, in Germany, of course, there was the Marx collection, Heiner.
Ludwig, yes.
Most of the early response to Warhol was in Europe.
It never eased off the way it happened in America. In Germany, it was, or in Europe, continuously the prices have been going, or the appreciation for Warhol has never stopped, and the love and desire because of America and because of Warhol and because he was the king of the 21st century art, and he was like the head of the pop movement. And I want to go back to what Larry also said, is the demand and the supply, and we, as much as we want to talk about where it came from, what it is, and why is that such a phenomenon today? And it fits, I mean, if you look at his art, you can put it anywhere today, and it just stands out, and it's so strong. You can have a little small 16 by 6, 12 by 12 painting, and just, it holds a whole wall. And no artist of that time does that, and how he fits today into our so-called designed homes. I mean, every home today that gets built is done by a designer, by an interior architect, and it's a must-have. So the demand is just endless, and it comes from everywhere, from the people who previously loved what he was doing, and from the new generation. You go to the Middle East, and I travel to the Middle East a lot. You see Warhols hang in tacky houses in Doha, and next to another interesting painting. So you can mix and match it, and it has become a real a real must-have. It's like a currency. Atiko always talks about it is a currency, and it has become a currency, and we all gravitate today to currency, something that we can put a value to it that we think will maintain itself. Historically, financially, I think it's all interconnected.
Well, yeah, currency is one good word for it, but I also think another word is icon. And icon is overused today to mean like celebrity, but Andy was not Roman Catholic. He was Eastern Rite Catholic. And the church he attended as a boy with his mother, went to 3 masses every Sunday. His mother's life revolved around the church, was Eastern Rite Catholic. They look like Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox churches. And you have the iconostasis, all the portraits of the saint, Byzantine style, very flat, gold leaf backgrounds, all touching each other. And I think Andy really, on one level, his work is almost religious art for a secular time. And I say, because this is who people worship: Marilyn, Elvis, Jackie, Mao, Lenin, the hammer and sickle, the dollar sign, the soup can. I mean, they're really icons. And I think religion has whether people call it religion or not, there's sort of a need to worship something. It's part of human nature. And
a reliquary.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just throwing that out as an idea of mine, and I wonder if any of you would like to address that.
What do you think, by the way, how things will read when you have a younger generation for whom, I mean, we've done some things at the museum, and it's fascinating to see kids like 20 years old, and they look at Marilyn Monroe, and they kind of know her, and they say, oh, that's like Madonna, right? And I go, well, yeah, via Marilyn. And it's sort of fascinating to me as some of, the world moves forward, like how a younger generation will see these things.
That's because I think a lot of them don't even know who Mao was, and Andy painted Mao.
Sadly, no.
Was the most famous person in the world.
Actually, a lot of the very young artists today kind of look at Andy as art himself. I mean, they're really fascinated with the fact that this is a man that really traveled beyond being just a painter, that he was a real artist for them, meaning anything that he did was art. And that is important, I think, to very young artists today. I mean, they really look up to the image of Andy Warhol kind of as being art. As artists in the Renaissance, kind of, they really experienced the same sort of phenomenon, that they were celebrities, that they were scientists, they did a number of things. And Andy represents that to young artists, even if they don't relate to the work, as much. But a lot of young artists are influenced by the process and the technique of his work. He was a figurative painter, an abstract painter.
Exactly.
He did basically
gave them permission.
Well, his video work and his films anticipated reality TV. He was a kind of prophet and a philosopher as well, in some sense.
When he stopped painting in 1968, after he was shot, and really started spending more time with the film. I mean, I think he suffered a great deal from, the art world rejecting him because of the fact that he was doing film. I mean, it was not a cool thing to do film if you were a painter. It wasn't really looked on as what your job was. I mean, like you to do one thing, and he didn't follow that road. He went to where he loved film. He collected movie stills from the time he was much younger.
8 years old, I think.
Yeah, he was very, he was very starstruck. I can remember going out to dinner with him, and he'd always want to go to this restaurant, where a famous movie star would go, and maybe he would see her there, and he really loved 40s and 30s movie stars.
He loved when he met Paulette Goddard, who was married to Charlie Chaplin and was, rather big star from the 40s. He loved going out with her, and she'd be bedecked in all her jewelry, and he just loved that whole thing.
Garbo walking her dog on 53rd Street. I mean, that was like a big thing for Andy.
Well, I remember coming out of a Broadway theater one night when we'd gone backstage to meet the stars. So you exit through the stage entrance, and there were all the professional autograph hounds there. And I said something like, "Oh, these people are so annoying, And Andy said, "Don't say that, Bob. That could be me. That would be me if I hadn't become a famous artist." And he meant it, But there's so much to talk about with Andy. I mean, you know, this idea that in the future everyone will be famous for 15 minutes is most, I mean, you know, that's come true. I mean, it's 15 seconds. Well, actually, Banksy came up with a great line. In the future, everyone will be anonymous for 15 minutes. Well, maybe with that, I think let's open. I thank you all, but let's open it up to the audience and see what questions they have.
They were just rolled up in the studio.
Questions? It's very hard to get Larry Gagosian to give an interview, so this is your chance. I've tried. Yes? Well, Donna said. Well, I think Peter could answer that actually as well as I can. How did?
Why don't we hand out the microphone here? Actually.
Oh yeah, we should maybe pass this microphone.
Switch it on.
Is there someone here from Fape who's in charge of this, or? Okay. Austin Fremont, a factory baby. Okay.
I'm sorry, I was just fascinated by the fact that Andy was very quiet and he didn't talk that much as far as what I understand. And I had seen him once where he didn't say a word and Fred Hughes did all the talking. So what got Andy, what kinds of things, how did he start talking? You know,
well,
what did
gossip.
he like to talk about?
He liked gossip.
He liked gossip?
That's absolutely correct, but the only way I can describe it is when he would then be alone with Fred Hughes. Out of talking.
But he didn't like to talk publicly.
No, he was really in control. He was very bashful, very quiet. He didn't really like to commit himself verbally or engage with many people. But the people that, you know, people like Vincent or people like Bob or Fred Hughes, he certainly would tell them what he thought.
Yeah, I've got a few monologues in this book, I mean, of Andy's. He was very curious about people, so after we would go to a dinner where he didn't say much, he then would say, well, you know, why do you think they got married? I mean, you know, which one has the money? Or does he really get, I mean, he was always trying to figure out human relationships. Right, I mean, it was like he couldn't understand how people connected. There's a new theory out, I don't know if any of you have heard it, that Andy was sort of Asperger's, because in some ways, he didn't like to be touched. He really, and I remember seeing a Page Powell photo of Andy putting his arm around Jean-Michel Basquiat, and I thought that was really love, because Andy never touched anyone. I never saw him. Do you ever see him put his arm around Jed Johnson all those years?
A few times.
And where was he politically? I mean, 68, Vietnam. Did he have an opinion? Did he care?
Talk about his food, like he would, like when the lunch was delivered. Evidently, he would just, nobody could touch the box. He also was germophobic. Germaphobe, yeah.
And Vincent knows he lived in constant fear of a fire at the factory. So poor Vincent would have to close up with him, and they would have to pull out the plug of every single, out of every socket, and then check it all over again. And when you were trying to leave to go to like a dinner with Andy and you were late, that would be quite nerve-wracking.
If he did know you, he would talk. I mean, like with me, he would, going to dinner, he would, and he was very funny. He had a very wry sense of humor. I mean, he would, bitch and, he had,
well, read the diaries.
Not bitch like bitch, but I mean, he could be, he's just funny.
Yeah, no, and he was like the kid who walks in a room, the child who walks in a room and sees the one thing wrong, and but he wouldn't say it till he got back in the taxi afterwards, I mean, he
some of his writings, and I never understand group effort in terms of, but I mean, if you really read some of those things, they're very pithy, they're very on the mark, and they're very biting. And I think that's the criticality. You know, I have many debates with colleagues, some who don't see Warhol in a political way, some people who do. And I think the genius of his images are that they can be read on those multiple levels. You can never, he always said that once you label something, you can never go back. Well, and I think that's a kind of a liberating concept. And to go to what you were saying about young artists, and how he said, you know, I don't understand why you can't be an abstract expressionist one day and a figurative painter. I think in the late work, though, he suffered for that. I think people didn't know what to do with the piss paintings or the camouflage paintings, and they were so out of character, but fundamentally, especially the camouflage, was just another representation. I mean, it's not dissimilar from what he was doing with Marilyn. They were based on a schematic, diagrammatic structure. But I still find there's so much more to figure out about Warhol, and as much as I'm always fascinated by him as a person, with any artist, I fundamentally, it's the work we're left with. And that's what we have now.
I think that's why Andy actually, he never wanted to really express what you said. He didn't want to be labeled. He never really wanted to express publicly a political opinion. Every time he was asked if he was gay, he would say, oh, sex is such hard work. And I mean, you know, he made films about homosexuality, but he didn't want to be part of any cause. He was a liberal Democrat, I would say. He grew up sort of worshiping FDR, and, but he didn't want to be part of any cause other than his own cause, in a way.
Was the Vote McGovern the only? There are a couple of posters,
Vote McGovern,
that were
but
done
he painted Nixon. Even though he painted Nixon looking like the devil, he didn't paint McGovern. He was forced into that by Lee Radziwill and Jackie Kennedy.
It's the best political poster
Fred
ever,
Hughes.
though.
But he really didn't want to do it, and he resisted those. When Joseph Beuys, when they exchanged portraits, and Joseph Beuys said he had to do a poster for the Green Party. To get around that, he had me sign them. I'll admit now, I forged those. You know, because in his head, then it wasn't really his. I mean, he didn't want to commit. I own some of those, by the way. And any more questions? Yes, over.
It seems that some of the best. It seems that some of the best contemporary art that we have is art that makes us ask questions, not only as individuals, but as society as well. And of course, the question of what is art is a very important one, but you're such a formidable panel. Can you talk a little bit about what some of the questions that Warhol's art provokes for each of you? What would those questions be?
Well, what is art, to start off with? I mean, that's the, but.
Well, that one I think we're beyond the what is art. I mean, it's art, like that's, you know, in terms of Duchamp and that one. To me, I think it's about belief systems and what you believe in. And that's, to me, one of the things that Warhol's work really hits at. You look at the image and it forces you to confront it on a familiar level. You look at something and say, oh, okay, I know what that is. And then the longer you look at it, the way it's made, what you were saying earlier, Peter, about the permutation, you know, the little sweep of what looks like a brush stroke. It's very complicated. And even the issue of the photograph, which has inherent in it a reality. I mean, you always look still. I don't care how much we have contemporary photography today of artists working with it. I still think that a photograph reads in a different way and it carries a sense of the world in a different way. And so for me, it's about beliefs. And maybe that goes to what you were saying about icons. That's mine.
You're always interested in knowing how many paintings of each series Warhol did. You know, like they see one Elvis or they'll see a Marilyn, and they feel there's 100 or 1,000 of them, when in reality he produced very little work of each of those series. So people always question, but how many are there? Because the Elvises all look the same, but in reality they all look different.
Yeah, they're probably.
The silkscreen is different, and the paint that he applied is different, and the pulse was different. Everything is different.
Jackies were the most, right? Were there 400 Jackies? 500.
That or the flowers?
That question, it's also, I think, how the work has transformed over a period of 40 years. Certainly in the 60s, it was very, very radical. Still radical today, but it's much more radical at that point because people were not so ready to accept that idea of silk screening and the technique that Andy, even though he drew beautifully, I mean, it was he was one of the best drawing. the idea of the silkscreen was, you know, was a very radical thing. And so if we were all sitting, there's not that many Jane Holzers who saw it right away and it made her happy. I mean, you know, a lot of people were like, I just know my friends, when I was collecting it, my friends thought I was crazy. You know? I mean, they thought really that, what are you doing
it wasn't
here?
art?
That it wasn't art, yeah, that it was like...
a joke. But even in the late 80s, people thought it was a joke.
It's
When we started buying Warhol, it was
I mean,
a joke.
on one level, it was a joke, but it wasn't. It was for real.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
But Andy had a great sense of irony and humor, and that kind of put people off. You know, you weren't supposed to be funny and say, you know, silly things in interviews, you know.
Go. I mean, no, there wasn't the serious.
No,
you know,
and he wasn't like Robert Motherwell, who was writing
different
treatises on his own art. You know, I mean, in fact, Andy would find that all super boring, but he knew the history of art. He'd been studying it since he was 11 years old.
He didn't get good reviews. He was...
He didn't have his first show in New York.
Robert Hughes said the commissioned portraits were not portraits. Andy was embalming his clients in the back of their limousines.
I mean, I read up this morning, in 1986, the Neiman Marcus Christmas catalog had actually an ad for Andy Warhol's portraits that were $35,000. And if you were flipping through to the catalog, it's like, whoa, I want to buy this for my wife.
Yeah,
having
Bill
that
Rubin probably had a heart attack
as a
when he saw
comparison
it.
to jewelry box, I mean, it was put on that level.
Yeah, and it was provocative to do those things. He in the philosophy book, which Pat Hackett and I helped write, but to clarify how Andy's writing was done, basically we interviewed Andy and we took lines, things Andy had said, and then sort of stretched them. You know, we were all. Vincent knows this. We all could imitate the way Andy talked. You know, we were acolytes. You know, Andy was very good at hiring people at a very young age and turning us into sort of mini Warhols in a way, you know. And so, I mean, but the philosophy book is Andy. I mean, it's Andy's thinking. It's not Pat Hackett's thinking. It's not my thinking. And but he wanted to provoke by starting a magazine that was about celebrity. It wasn't about art. We very rarely interviewed an artist in an interview. I mean, we interviewed socialites more than artists. And I mean, so all of that, I think, really put off the official art world, you know.
Larry,
I mean, Andy was a provocateur. I mean, he was a truly avant. When you could finally pin him down on who influenced you, he would always say Duchamp. He was in competition with Picasso to sort of produce more and be more famous and more successful. But Duchamp was his influence, his major. Larry's looking quizzically at me, you know.
No, I'm just following what you're saying. Yeah, I think just getting back to being a dealer. A friend of mine started to very important art collector. He overlooked Warhol when he had many opportunities to buy Warhols. And he told I used to try to promote Warhol as somebody that he should add to his collection in a meaningful way. And he said, he's just like I saw this. An artist doesn't dance at. He's not out at Studio 54 till 2 o'clock. That's just not what an artist does. I mean, the artist is like in his garret and he's having dinners with curators and museums. He doesn't. And this is an intelligent person I'm talking about. It's not like somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. And he said, I just didn't believe that's not what an artist is. An artist lives a different kind of a lifestyle and is not so public and is not so gay or whatever it was. There was something about Andy that rankled people and made them not trust the enterprise.
But it was that very something that I think goes back to what Peter said about young artists today, because young artists today basically can live however they want. They don't have to sit in a garage.
He changed the art world.
He changed.
I mean, if you look at your young artists that you represent today, I mean, are they talking about Andy's work and who and what has influenced them? I mean,
it's obvious that Andy's influenced them. I mean, whether they talk about it or not, it just has to do with their personality. But
well, what I find whenever I see Jeff Koons, he wants to ask me questions about Andy. So, I mean, I think, but even the younger artists, like, you know, like a Dustin Yellen or a Bruce High Quality, or I mean, they're all kind of obsessed with him.
And even in the 80s, when Warhol went back to, like, he was out and not in the inn anymore, Warhol went and he associated himself with all the young artists, from Basquiat and Clemente and Schnabel and Sadi and Herring. And they energized him in such a way that he gave it back to them. Yeah. And I think since that moment on, every young artist, even the ones today, are so in tune with
Perez
Warhol.
is obsessed with Warhol. I mean,
Pierre Huyghe, there are a number of international artists who have written about Warhol. And there's a great issue of Art Forum, if anybody's interested, you go online. And the whole issue is called Pop After Pop. And they have, I think, 15 artists on Warhol that run from, you know, Richard Prince to Pierre Huyghe. And you have to grapple with Warhol. He's, you know, I mean, there's no way around him in that sense. But I also think it makes it, you know, the permission part is a big thing, that artists could work. Now we don't even think twice about artists who work across media. And Warhol's not the only one to work in that way. Certainly Ed Ruscha, Roy Lichtenstein, there are many, many. But I think Warhol did it in a way that was so bold with film, photography, and then, as you say, the publishing ventures. You know, I can't think of another artist who actually was as much of a kind of generator of levels of communication, both in terms of art and in terms of mainstream, because I still remember Andy Warhol's TV, which was fantastic. I mean, it was really hip, and it was before MTV. And that's what year, Vincent? I don't know. What year was it?
Started 19.
Yeah. And it was fantastic, and it was so ahead of its time at that point.
Sure.
Music influenced Andy a great deal. In the early 1960s, he followed the Rolling Stones, and we signed him. I signed him to the William Morris Agency with a guy named Harry Upland. So we knew Andy, and he used to hang out with us with the Rolling Stones. He felt total rejection by the art world. I could have bought any of his paintings. He wanted to give them to Harry and I. None of us bought them. I don't know if you know Bob Gruen, famous photographer,
right.
Mm-hmm.
John Lennon.
Mm-hmm.
Andy offered him paintings. He used to photograph Andy. And the amazing thing is he felt total rejection, and that's why he went into the movie business. He felt the art world rejected him. And, you know, none of you really talked about how much music really influenced Andy in those days, those early days.
Well, Jane was there for that. I mean, the Velvet Underground was kind of his band.
Yeah, well, we represent the Velvet Underground too, but that's where we really got close to Andy. But what I was really trying to get to is he really felt the art world wasn't really his thing, and he went on to move on with Paul into the music side of the business and to other sides of the business because the art community just did not accept him. And, you know, it's really, you know, feeling rejection, I think that really, you know, turned him on to those other kinds of art forms.
I think Peter had an experience about trying to give one of the big mouths to the Metropolitan Museum. When they weren't, it was a little hard to get them to take it at first.
That was 1978. I just think they weren't ready for it yet, and the things were just really more. I mean, contemporary art was changing so quickly, and they just were not really there at that time where they had some of his work, but that was enough. You know, they didn't need any more. And, you know, that's all changed. Of course, all the museums now, you know, are supporting, showing his work. But I don't know that much about his interest in music. I mean, I don't really know that much about that.
I mean, he did spend a lot of time with Mick Jagger, and he did do 2 album covers in the 70s for the Rolling Stones, and he did a big series of paintings. And the car.
Friends and men.
The New York Dolls and
David
the cars.
Johansen, yeah.
But he did that huge series of portraits of Mick, which were both paintings and prints. I think, the music world, I mean, Andy liked the sort of pop culture world, whether it was film stars or rock stars or fashion designers.
Sure the rejection necessarily led to his.
I
think he would have gotten there anyway. I think he was I mean, I didn't know him at that time, and I know him less than most of the people, knew him less than most of the people on this panel, but he was very curious about a lot of things, and I think he liked culture in the broadest sense, and he liked new things and new people, and it's not surprising that he would have been interested in music and wanting to participate in it in some way. But the point you make, I think, is a very good one. He really was rejected by the art world in general, and by other artists, his peers, and even by, I must say, Leo Castelli to a certain degree.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
There was an exhibition. I think Bob and Peter and Vincent remember this very well. I'm sure Donna does, and Jay. There was an exhibition of Donald Judd at Green Street Gallery, and there was one enormous sculpture made out of plywood that spanned the entire 80, 90 feet of the gallery. It was a very beautiful sculpture. It took the entire first, ground floor of, and Andy had just done these. What were they? Dollar signs and guns and knives. And Leo put them in the basement. He put them in the basement, and I don't even think there was a sign indicating that they were in the basement. And from that point on, Andy really felt that Leo had really kind of there was a line there, and Andy just felt that Leo really wasn't interested in his work, and it wasn't at the level that Leo was paying attention to. And I think a lot of artists probably thought he was a bit of a gimmick and a bit of a joke, and he wasn't included in that kind of inner circle of and they were wrong, they were absolutely wrong.
How about the story with Bob Dylan when Andy gave him a painting and he used it as a dartboard?
Yeah.
But one should add that in Europe it was totally different. I mean,
he traded it for a couch, is what he
did. He traded
it was
for a
totally
couch,
different in Europe. I mean, he had a retrospective at the Tate in 1970. The first trip I went on with Andy was for the premieres of the German premieres of Trash, his film Trash, in 1972. I mean, kids were shaking Andy's limousine. It was the #2 box office hit in Germany in '72 after Easy Rider. Joe D'Alessandro, believe it or not, won a German Oscar for best acting. But all the big serious collectors in Germany had already been 10 years buying Andy's work. Andy had fantastic exhibitions all through the '70s at the Palais Gallier in Paris, all over Italy. It was fantastic to see those shows and the turnout of both the elite and the intellectual elite, the social elite, and the kids. But that was not the case in America, So.
Antonio is very.
Yeah.
He talks in I think it's in Popism, where he says you also collect the work of other artists. So I mean there was also a relationship I think on the business side that was probably very different in the way other artists operated. So. Dorothy.
All right, Dorothy.
I just want to say, I think, and
Dorothy.
Hi. I think Andy's peers really did appreciate his work. I know Roy collected the work, Bob Rauschenberg collected the work, Leo, actually, as it got to be later on in the 80s, was maybe not the eye that he had been, or he might have put Andy's work in the basement. I never heard that. But I do think that Andy's peers really respected him.
I think Roy more than the others, and Roy and he exchanged portraits. But I don't think.
Well, Bob Rauschenberg. I think that Andy kind of idolized Jasper, and he always wanted Jasper to be the one.
I don't think.
And
Andy,
so that was his big disappointment. I think.
There's some good work of Andy's.
He might just, later on. He might have gotten.
No, Andy always felt rejected by Jasper. That was what he was saying. Yeah. Well, I think I remember going to dinner with Helen Frankenthaler and Andy, just the three of us, and she was so condescending to Andy, and she was so critical of the fact that we were hanging out with Halston and people like that, and how could you? And it was just two different mindsets completely.
She's that way too.
Yeah. And also, we had much more fun doing that, let me tell you.
One more question.
Bob,
I think we're running
you
out.
mentioned one aspect of Andy's youth, the experience in the churches.
Yes.
Do any of you know more about Andy's early life that contributed to the man he became?
Everything.
Well, I mean, I'll give another plug to my book, but yeah, no, I think his early life, especially the religious aspect of it, because he was a very sickly child. When he was 8 years old, he came down with this disease of the nervous system called St. Vitus dance, and he was in bed for a year. He was very, very close to his mother. His father died when he was 12 in a coal mine in West Virginia. They were very poor. I think the poverty had a lot to do with Andy's hoarding, collecting. I call it hoarding more in Andy's case, because I mean he didn't buy one Navajo blanket. He bought like 50, and he left them in the bags they came in. He until Jed Johnson finally decorated the house on 66th Street. Andy's houses were just like with storage rooms. Yeah, I think the religious aspect, the poverty aspect, and he was a starstruck kid because he had spent a lot of time in bed. He started writing to the Hollywood studios, and they would, in the fanzines, you could clip coupons and send away for a free autographed photo of Judy Garland or Mickey Rooney.
He was the child of immigrants, and I think that's a huge part. And if you look at those paintings of the before and after, the nose job picture, to me, it functions. We know Warhol didn't like his nose. He had his nose fixed in like 58. These are the ridiculous things you learn when you're researching through archives. But that painting speaks to American assimilation. It speaks to ideas of even global beauty. It's such a fascinating image, and I think that's a huge part. I think Warhol embodied an American dream. And one of the experiences I'll never forget is when I did the retrospective at Tate Modern. I had a call that then former President Clinton wanted to come through the show with his daughter Chelsea, and Chelsea went off, and I was there with Bill, and I took him, and he wanted to see the whole show, and I'll never forget what it meant on a symbolic level to be with a president who in himself was an embodiment of the American dream, looking at these paintings. So I do think that's a huge part. There's an aspirational part of Warhol's work, the things we aspire to. And I think that's where the criticality both comes in terms of consumption. I've always read the disaster paintings slightly from a religious perspective, that you are punished for consuming. That there's a dark side to Warhol as well, and I think it's important to acknowledge both the celebratory feel-good, which I agree, and the flowers, but then there's also a side of it is very serious, and it could be the religious side that you're talking, that you really understand.
It is, you do something bad, you're going to be punished.
You don't get away with anything, unfortunately. So there's always a hell.
And Andy would run into church every Sunday. He didn't stay for a whole mass, but he always felt that need to run in and cover his bases.
Heaven and hell. There's that painting, right?
I think we're out of time, unfortunately, because I think with this group we could all talk forever. Just to wrap up here, on behalf of FAPE, I would like to thank Guildhall for showing our original print, photography, and site-specific collections this summer. It's been a great success, and that's thanks to Guildhall's executive director, Ruth Appelhoff, and the deputy director and chief curator, Christina Strasfeld. They've done so much to make this exhibition and all the events around it a big success. I'd also like to thank all my panelists, Peter, Donna, Larry, Jane, and Pico and Aby. As always, a special thanks goes to FAPE's indefatigable and creative chairwoman, Jo Carol Lauder. And to all my fellow board members who worked with her to bring FAPE's message of patriotism through art to the Hamptons. Finally, I want to thank Doug Woodham, the chairman of Christie's Americas, whose generous support made this exhibition possible. And I'd also like to thank Vincent Fremont, who was my colleague at the factory for 13 years I was there, and continued to work with Warhol and the Warhol Foundation until very recently, and to Eric Shiner, the director of the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, for being here today. And I would have loved to have them up here, but we just got bigger and bigger. Anyway, thank you all for coming.